All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm really happy to announce, to introduce Dr. Paul Tibbets, who's currently the Deputy CIO for Architecture, Strategy, and Design at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Tibbets is an experienced executive in change management, organizational development, and global health IT systems. He's been a speaker of ours for many years. He's actually won our speaker award 3 times in a row, so he's one of our favorites. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Tibbets.
Parham, thanks so much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for coming. And Parham gave me a challenging topic to deal with here, which is protecting information and reducing costs. So we're going to run through this scintillating slide deck here, and I know you all will be on the ends of your chairs as we go through this. I don't mind. In fact, I would encourage you to ask questions as we go along, so feel free to interrupt me if you like. The slide deck is yours, or Parham, I'm sure, posted somewhere, so you'll have the slides anyway if you want to go through those, if you're really bored one day. The CIO at the VA, well, first of all, I run architecture, strategy, and design, as you heard Parham say, so the CIO at the VA gave me an additional task, I guess, related to that, and that is to address this problem you see here, that basically find money. I'm sure, how many people here are government employees? Great, okay, well, I'm sure those that you know, and I guess if for the vendors in the room who keep their ear to the ground also know, we in federal government have a major budget problem, and certainly we in the VA do as well, even though we have been treated very well over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years, we VA, for reasons because of who our clients are. I guess I should stop at that point, by the way. I don't know if anyone else has asked, but could I have a show of hands of all the veterans in the room? Veterans? So I'd like to thank you all for your service to the country. Thank you so much. We envision pretty flat budgets for the foreseeable future, and I think a lot of us in the VA think, in a year or two we might be thankful if our budget is flat, because it actually might go down, and with a lot of the pain that you all could envision there. So anyway, the key there, as you might imagine, is how are we going to do new things? Well, Roger Baker, our CIO, said there's really only one way, in truth, to do new things, and that's to quit doing old things and repurpose the money. I mean, that's to make a long story short. So this task force he created at the more or less the beginning of the summer, last summer, for gee whiz effect, he called it the Ruthless Reduction Task Force, so that it would stick in everybody's mind, I think, and it did in the VA. So people know what RRTF means now when they see it. So we came up with a bunch of recommendations, many of which you'll see here. Some of which address information protection. But what I'm going to show you is the overall context in which this was done, and the slide deck goes way beyond information protection. Basically, just the mission statement, what we set out to do is find money. I could paraphrase this whole thing in a different way by saying our task force job was to tell everybody else how to quit doing stupid things. I mean, you could look at it that way as well. Duplication here and there and all sorts of stuff that you all could probably guess at. We put a group of people together, probably I'd say around 35 or 40 people. We met 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, focused on nothing but this, and produced 100 pages worth of recommendations at the end of the summer. And I'll step you through what we did and some of those recommendations. And that's who the task force was and all that. We sort of use what we call subpoena authority, if you want to, in quotes. That is because this was a CIO tasker, we could send out data calls throughout the organization and get feedback on a variety of things. So a lot of our operation was that way. We did try to look at in a holistic or programmatic way at things rather than arbitrarily saying, okay, Roger Baker could have done this himself if he wanted to, simply tell everybody we're going to take a 15% cut of your budget. I mean, a salami slice everybody, but he precisely did not want to do that. So this approach was the alternative, and that is find something that we shouldn't be doing and quit doing it for a variety of reasons why we shouldn't be doing it. We did phase our approach. I'll talk about phase 2 in a minute. It's not on the slide, but phase 1 was to more or less look at quick hits. Phase 3 was to look at policy formulation and organizational changes. We did come up with only one organizational change, and I'll mention it right now because you're not going to see it in the rest of the deck. We did not go too far down that pathway of organizational changes. But one that's important that I and my peer who runs product development, Lorraine Lanfried, came up with was, with all the talk about authoritative data sources and corporate data management, which we at the VA have now initiated. We have a corporate data governance board. In order to give reality to that, we thought, well, why not look at the way development happens actually inside of the development organization itself? And if we espouse all these motherhood and apple pie precepts about write data once, use it many times, et cetera, why don't we set up the organization that way so that actually people have to operate that way instead of hoping they operate that way. So inside of the development organization, we're actually standing up now we're in the process of standing up a single data program office and separating that out entirely from all application developers. So all the application developers will have to go through a single data program office to create, read, update, or delete data, and to do anything with data. All data stores will be under the control of this single data program office. So from a data management perspective, we think that's going to be a huge step forward. I might say from a cost reduction perspective, we believe it will too, although I couldn't give you a number for it right now, but in helping to narrow down duplicate expenditures on duplicated data stores all over the place, let alone the impact on creating different answers for things, we think we'll save money that way too. And then phase 2, I said I'd mention in a minute, this was a detailed analysis, initiating a detailed analysis on looking at applications and how those applications relate to business functions, and I'll show you how that came out in a minute, at least as far as we got with it. That phase 2 was to set up a matrix like this. It's a simple, really 2x2 matrix. I mean, a two-dimensional matrix. One axis was business functions, and those business functions were pretty much VHA and VBA, health and benefits. That gave us about 300 business functions, 300 line items in this matrix. And that would be the S as the services, if you will, business functions. The applications, we were able to identify about 1,200 applications, so it gave us a matrix 300 by 1,200, and we then proceeded to figure out how we were going to analyze this 300 by 1,200 matrix. And you'll see it's obviously a big job, and you can see how far into the shallow end of that swimming pool we got. And that's just one more explanation of that. So first of all, to create one of the column headers, right, the applications. Well, it turned out we had to do an inventory of inventories, right? So we didn't have just one inventory. So we had the SMART database, which was for the information protection people, T21, which was another cost reduction work group that I'd worked on 2 years ago. The BTT is the database our comptroller uses to create the consolidated IT budget. The CDCO is a data center. It's a franchise fund in Austin, Texas, and it uses chargebacks since it's a franchise fund, so it had an inventory of applications. SD&E itself, that's our operations group, service delivery and engineering. Had a list of systems that they use for COOP and DR purposes. And the enterprise architecture group itself had a systems inventory. The acquisition community had a systems inventory, Zycus. And then the TSPR is a database of where program managers put their program documentation. So we had yet another database of systems. So we put all those together. We collapsed all those into one, as best we could tell, non-overlapping inventory, which produced the 1,200 columns, if you will. And we also put that entire data store, that consolidated thing I just told you, into our data architecture repository, IDAR. So right now at VA, our single most complete inventory of all our applications is in our data architecture repository. I've got to use this. One of the things we're supposed to look at in contracting, and I'm disposed with this quickly, which is why I'm putting it up there now, Zycus is just the name of the system our acquisition community uses to manage contracts, solicitations, awards, and so forth. Turns out the the way we put contracts together, I think of this as a data management problem, but you all may describe it differently. But the way we put contracts together, it's really very difficult to tell if one contract is buying the same thing as another contract. And because one's T&M, one has specified deliverables, one's something else, and one's something else, and they call it something, you know, and by the time you get through all that, a list of contracts, unless you specifically not only read the performance work statement, if there are deliverables specified other than man hours, you really wind up having to go talk to the people to figure out if this contract is doing something duplicative of another contract. So there was nothing in any data store that we could find in the VA to do that in an automated way. So that's still a problem today, and so consolidating contracts is still difficult for us. If any of you have any insight into how to go about doing that for a $2-point-something billion budget, please let me know. We'd be all ears. Creating the initial list of the next thing we did with Big Fix and SCCM, our network scanning tools, we took results of those scans. Those are periodic scans. They're not turned on continuously, and I'll come to that in a minute. But we got those inventories as well to look at in sort of descending order what were the most frequently installed apps and so forth around VA. One of the things we want to do and have not done yet, but it's one of the future activities which we'll be starting up now, and I can talk more about that in a few minutes too after we turned in all these recommendations. Roger wanted us to keep going, but is looking at Big Fix and SCCM and how good they are or not for software metering and the impact of turning them on a continuous basis and what impact that would have itself on our network. So we're planning on doing a side-by-side comparison in two VISNs, two areas of the country, of one versus the other to look at the impact on the network and the information we get. As things stand today, we're not metering software usage, so I couldn't tell you right now which particular app is used more frequently than another, which is important from a license management perspective, obviously, but even more importantly than simple utilization is business transaction impact of those apps, and that's yet a whole nother layer even above SCCM or Big Fix, where we would like to get to, well, how many this particular VetsNet, some particular subset of VetsNet, this particular app is used to actually process how many veteran claims for compensation and pension per day, per week, or per month. That's really where we want to get with these apps, so we know in business terms, in terms of a business transaction, how frequently these apps are used, not just how frequently someone logs into them. So that's the next level up, which we haven't gotten to yet in this RRTF work, and hopefully we'll lay in plans to get to that next. Let's see. This database, the last one there, we created a database, then also, in addition to this two-dimensional matrix I mentioned to you, we created a database. In the back of this briefing is the data dictionary we use for that database to say what is all the descriptive information, metadata, if you will, about each system that we think is important with respect to understanding its utility and viability for the future. And again, so we struggled with it, and this graph is a graph of our struggles and in the past and in the future. So, and these are just two indicators we picked, two of the data elements to look at completeness of about 50 or so to describe each system. The first one is simply, is there a named system owner, by name, a human being, with Jane Doe, not the office of SD&E or the office of PD or the office of this, but a person. And when specified that way, it turned out to be a real struggle to make sure we had some wirehead actually inside of OI&T who was actually in charge of each of these systems. And you can see the struggle there. I mean, when we just started tracking it in August, I mentioned, and it took us all the way till September the 21st to identify a system owner for each of the apps in that database, right? Then we asked that system owner, would you please now, you system owner, since you run this thing, you can fill out the rest of the data elements on in that database about that particular system, right? Which OMB 300 is it in? Who's your business sponsor, et cetera? And you can see the red line down there is the indicator of how good the system owners were at filling out the rest of the data in that inventory. So at best, at the end of September, they got up to around 10% of the information, right? And I'll tell you, one of the interesting things we found out with respect to system viability when I ran the T21 work group was the single most important predictor of system issues, problems, failure, outages, downtime, unacceptability to the end user, you name it, a slurry of things. The single most important predictor was the absence of identified business sponsor. Because the absence of identified business sponsor means there's no proponent at the table at budget time. Right? So that red line down there is a big problem. Now we're going to push on it some more now that we're continuing, so I'll mention right now what Roger decided to do. What he said was, okay, you turned in this 100 pages worth of recommendations, some of which you'll see here in a few minutes, and we're going to turn it over to a committee to run this thing, our comptroller's committee. I said, yeah, that's the plan, the comptroller. He says, well, no, a committee is not going to push this hard enough. We need a program office, and we need you to run the program office. So now I'm standing up a Ruthless Reduction Program Office, starting Monday, actually, to take all these recommendations and turn each one of them into a plan of action and milestones with an accountable individual, an accountable PM, who will be someone outside of our little office, right, an accountable PM. And if any of you have heard of the Program Management Accountability System, PMAS, that's what's gotten VA to about 80% success in software delivery now. Each one of these POAMs is going to go into PMAS. So it's going to be treated as any software delivery project would be, with red flag meetings, TechStat meetings, and all that around each of these POAMs. So that's how we're pursuing this. What I'm talking about is a column in that matrix I just mentioned, and that it's one of those 1,200 things. Now, one of those 1,200 things, by and large, the naming conventions that people have stumbled into over the years have something to do with the business function of that bucket of software, right? So, you know, VetsNet, I mean, you might guess it has something to do. Yes, it involves a network. Yes, it involves veterans. Well, it happens to be the thing that processes largely compensation and pension claims for veterans, right? So, but it'll be one column in that thing, VetsNet. And when you said, is it an entire system, it's the name of an application suite. Well, right. I mean, so the way I interpreted your question was sort of a life cycle management, total cost of ownership question. And if we have if you're asking, do we have high fidelity traceability from that name to the application, to all the infrastructure components that it runs on, and the slice of telecommunications that it soaks up, the answer is no. We do not have good line of sight, direct line of sight. We have some, but not less than wonderful, direct line of sight traceability like that. Because we have a single, I should mention to everybody, we do have a single IT authority at the VA. We do have a single appropriation. All of the contracts, all the systems, and all the IT staff all work for Roger Baker, the CIO. So in that sense, we have a very good consolidated view of what our infrastructure expenditures are. But alignment of those infrastructure expenditures to each app and from each app to each business process is not a very good alignment, no. And this way analytically creates a problem, trying to sort it out backwards, if you will. Going forward from a life cycle management, total cost of ownership perspective, it's also a problem if we can't produce a TCO estimate. We now have two ways to fix that problem with the VA, which started up with this administration, and so those wheels are still kind of beginning to spin forward. Under PMAS, one of the two principal provisions of PMAS is that every project must have an IPT. The infrastructure people have to be represented on that IPT, or there's no IPT. If there's no IPT, there's no project. You don't get approval to move forward. So that's one way where the total cost of ownership should be depicted in the planning phase for every project. That's a PMAS policy. The second is, for all new starts, we have now created a Business Intake Review Board, BIRB. That Business Intake Review Board is also run by my organization, an SES who works for me, Maureen Coyle. And all of OINT is represented on that Business Intake Review Board. The comptroller, the development, the operators, the engineers, security are all on there. So that board's job is to take every new requirement, assign a principal office of responsibility, and then every member of that board has to contribute their cost to the cost of getting that thing done. So we now have two ways to look at total cost of ownership. But that's starting, a year ago. Right, so you go too far backwards and you don't have all that. So to tell you, if if a server goes down today at the Austin Automation Center, CDCO, you know, we'd have to call up Austin and say, okay, now tell us exactly what was running on that server and what's the impact on the hospital is going to be tomorrow morning. I mean, there's no really good way to do that right now for us. So this is just from looking over the systems inventory, some of the things you can see from a quality control perspective, the kind of things we discover. They were unsuccessful at finding 10% of the system owners. They discovered 2% of the apps were inactive, 6% had some other issues with them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just to show you that this is the first time we have such an inventory for the entire VA, and of course you might imagine there's a lot of QA issues with it. They have to be sorted through. Well, fine, so at least we've got it in one place and we're starting to sort through the stuff. So this is a variety of the approaches we did look at and will look at both when we operate as a task force and when we move forward to operate as a program office and reducing spend. A lot of acronyms are in here. I'm sorry, I just put the slides together. These are the same slides I use with Roger Baker and everybody else, so you're getting the benefit of all the acronyms, soup, that we live with at VA. But anyway, EMF is the Enterprise Management Framework, and that's the suite of tools that our operations division would use for management of all of our infrastructure assets throughout the VA, right? To understand what's up, what's down, remote remediation, predictive analytics on queuing and buffer overflows and everything to try to keep our infrastructure operating properly. And it's being slowly funded over time. But it's important from our perspective, aside from all the knowledge it would give us about the infrastructure, it's important from our perspective because it would help us identify capacity-demand mismatches throughout our infrastructure, which we are riddled with today, right? Because as things stand today, the single IT authority was created in 2006. Prior to that time, it was every man, woman, and child for himself. Tom, Dick, and Harry could go buy what they wanted, install it in their basement, and hope that it did, that this Tinker Toy solution fulfilled whatever industrial problem the guy was trying to solve. And that's what we inherited in 2006, right? So we have not done a massive rip and replace of all that stuff. Most of that stuff, most of those capacity demand mismatches are still out there, not to mention single points of failure and COOP-DR issues. So that's all still out there, and we're still sort of plowing through that. But without an enterprise management framework, it just makes it that much more difficult to find those capacity demand mismatches and do something about them. And then data center consolidation, another set of options. We're moving forward on that. We're putting together an overall strategy for data center consolidation and refactoring and taking full advantage of a cloud construct. However, in the meantime, while we're putting that overall strategy together, we're doing some piecemeal things. And in this particular instance, for example, we've consolidated half of our country on the health side into data centers on West and East Coast. The middle of the country was not yet consolidated because VA had not gotten that far. Change of administration came along, and Roger Baker decided that what he likes to say is he'd like to get out of the data center business. And as a first step in that direction, for the middle of the country, he's had us create a relationship with the Defense Department, with DISA. And so for the middle of the country, we're looking at we're putting the plans in place, I should say we're putting the plans in place to actually move the central part of our country into DISA decks. So that's going on now. Again, looking at low utilization, I mentioned simple utilization, but also business transaction volume is what we'd like to look at. Multiple systems with the same functionality. This two-dimensional matrix, to some extent, helps us get at that, not as well as we'd like to. Of course, smarter buying, this data center topology thing is going to be, we're going to work through that as we go through data center consolidation. Let's see, system availability, just, if there are technical issues, the technical reference model, TRM, that is also run in my office, and that's the list of acceptable functionality, acceptable technologies that can be implemented at the VA. And again, our principal enforcement mechanism in that is the IPT, where our architects are also embedded on each IPT and should throw a red flag if an IPT goes down a pathway that is not compatible with a TRM, or make the proposal to the TRM work group to change the TRM, one or the other. Yes? Yes, 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 and you'll see it on one of the recommendations here. Yeah, a big one. Well, one big one is the Benefits Delivery Network, BDN. It's responsible now for processing claims, benefits claims, checks for veterans. It's the electronic relationship between us and the Treasury. Is also handled by BDN. It's a Honeywell Bull system. It's extremely difficult to get parts for it. I mean, on and on and on. And quite frankly, and this is a problem that precedes the single IT authority. I mean, we've inherited this problem too, but we haven't been successful in getting high enough priority for investment to get off of it. So with this, you know, we did have a recommendation on it in our RRTF recommendations. We are going to pursue it again now to try to, in the context of creating additional education benefits and so forth, work into that, the cost of getting off of BDN. So maybe we'll be successful this time around. But yeah, it's unfortunately inside the VA, a well-known disaster waiting to happen. The VITRI interface engine is another one. I mean, it has died many times on us. It has wiped out pharmacy transactions across most of VA. We're in the process of doing a hardware upgrade on that and a software upgrade, both on VIE to their next version. So it's been a problem for us, and for that one, I think we're a little bit better off because we're now also in the process of buying a corporate enterprise service bus for the entire VA, right? So as we move down this to support both health and benefits. And the virtual lifetime electronic record, that's a joint initiative with the Department of Defense. That will, over time, I think, displace VIE as our message handling capability. Now, I can't tell you we have a timeline for that yet, but at least I know the replacement is coming along. So, but how that's exactly going to overlap, I can't tell you that yet. We do have a division also, I'll mention, inside of my organization. We have a new division in the VA called Product and Platform Management, also run by the chairman of the Business Intake Review Board, Maureen Coyle. And she's going to have about 15 or so engineers working for her. The senior level she's now got on board. Their job precisely is to do that technology forecasting, to look at a stack, if I can call it that, and figure out which components, who's bought out whom, and which ones at end of life and all that, and do that technology forecasting. Is actually, that's a new mission that Roger just stood up in OINT about 8 months ago, and we're hiring up to do that thing also. So I mentioned the matrix to you. This is my only screenshot of that 300 by 1200 matrix, but just to give you an idea, and obviously I compressed the columns and rows, but you can see the totals over on the right. So if you just look at the first one up there, just one line in this matrix, one of the 300 lines, that first one is create data repositories and data marts. And if you'll notice that one line, if you go all the way across all 1,200 columns, there are 91 X's in that line. 91 X's, right? So that's one line. That one line needs a program manager. That one line needs a bunch of analytics imposed on it to say, okay, what are those 91 apps or systems doing? Are they actually all needed, or how much redundancy is there in there, non-value added duplication? So that particular line happens to be one that we attacked, and we have some sense of what those 91 are and what they should be. We do have a program manager for that one. There are two more lines on here that we attacked. One down at the bottom there, enable single view of patient registration, and there was a third one in the middle there. I think provide support to identify, no, that wasn't. Anyway, there's a third line. We did 3 lines. 3 of the 300 lines we got analyzed, and because you can see the large numbers there on each line. Yeah, so well, let me say going forward, because in order to stand up this program office that Roger wanted us to stand up, I asked for representatives from all of OINT, and OIS being one of them. So yes, we have a security member of the program office itself, and then that'll become part of the criteria we'll use for each of the applications, yes. The program office I've kept very small to sort of monitor who has a plan of action milestones and who doesn't, and kind of keep things on track. The PMs are all going to be outside of our office, right? And so, but yes to your question. So anyway, we have analysis on 3 of the lines done, but a lot more to follow. And obviously, we have of the 330 lines, 327 left to go, and very large numbers of systems here, and a lot of opportunity for cost reduction, I think, when you look at it this way, right? So I think Roger was, it was wise on his part to set us down this pathway to start trying to uncover how much non-value-added duplication there actually is in what we're doing in a federal agency. That's another question. Not yet. I think some of my colleagues pointed out that another field we should add to the database with that graph on it, the way we collect the 50 or so attributes for each system, would be the dependencies and interfaces. We don't have that in this database yet, but that's already been pointed out to me, and we would intend to do that going forward, yes. Excuse me one second. There's another place where that's also of great interest, and that is to our comptroller, because while we do have a consolidated IT budget now, identifying dependencies of one budget line on another right now is very weak in the way we have it all in one place, right? But the dependency of one line on another is kind of who's at the table and who happens to remember that I can't do that without this thing down here. So we also want to do that for the purpose of a much more coherent approach to our budget build. Well, we have lots of governance in place already, and that governance involves our customers. So, and to step you through it kind of quickly, so we'd use those established governance mechanisms. So anyway, to step you through it quickly, Roger Baker is our CIO, right? And he is an assistant secretary. He chairs a board called the Information Technology Leadership Board, ITLB. On that board with him is the Undersecretary for Health, the Undersecretary for Benefits, the Undersecretary for Cemeteries, and a scattering of the staff offices. I don't know, the comptroller, the VA comptroller, and some others, general counsel are probably on there. So that's the top-level leadership of our customers, right? So if need be, and that's an IT governance board, so if need be, that board would make a determination, put money over here and don't put money over there, or repurpose it or do something with it. I say if need be, because there's a board right below that. It happens to be called the BNTIB, and I, for the life of me, don't remember the name of what that acronym stands for, other than they do money stuff. It's run by the OINT comptroller. But again, the VHA, VBA, cemeteries, and all the staff offices all have members on that BNTIB. So most of the functional priority resolution happens at that BNTIB. Right. It's chaired by our comptroller, IT comptroller, but all the members of it are the customers, the Veterans Health Administration, Veterans Benefits Administration, et cetera, right? So they would give a thumbs up, a thumbs down. They do. This has been going on since 2006, by the way, so this is not new for us. They do give a thumbs up, a thumbs down to the entire budget every year. I mean, our entire budget is built with that, through that board, that BNTIB. So VHA, VBA, cemeteries, all that. They have all full visibility and voting rights on what goes on the top line, what goes number 2, what goes number 3, et cetera. Very much so, and if you remember that graph I showed you with the blue line that went up and the red line across the bottom, that red line is really the identification of the business sponsors for those systems, and as you might imagine, in a large institution with a lot of legacy apps hanging around, the business sponsor might still be alive and well, or the business sponsor might be dead. So we're trying to plow through that stuff backwards exactly for that reason, to figure out, is there still an advocate for this thing, and do we still need it? Going forward the same way. I mean, with the BNTIB, they're forward-looking, right, to build the budgets for the future, but that is all done with the functional community, our business sponsors. 100% of our budget is reviewed and approved by our business sponsors, every penny in it. We do not unilaterally spend anything in OINT, literally, true. Okay, so anyway, that's the matrix we put together. Let's see, is that, yes. So some of the information protection things, consolidation of duplicate efforts, network consolidation of network monitoring tools, security authentication tools, some traffic analysis. There's a particular traffic analysis tool that our information security people decided they didn't need. They looked at a risk trade-off. This Orion product did 90% of what they needed. The additional 10%, that other tool also included in it, but they decided for the duplicate expense they didn't need that additional 10%, so they killed it. And then, in general terms, more virtualization of the software and tools that they use to run the NSOC. From a cybersecurity perspective, I guess greater dependence on continuous monitoring, I would say. We had a contract in place to assist with this security control assessment on site, very expensive, travel, looking over documents when you're traveling from Florida to Washington State and all that stuff. That whole contract was ended. We're not doing that anymore, or at least very little of it, I would say. I wouldn't say none, but very little of it. Rather than looking for new tools, our approach now at the NSOC is to get more use out of the tools we have already bought with enterprise-wide licenses, Big Fix, Tenable. And for the residual of documentation review that has to happen, a minor amount, to use Jerry Davis's words, we would just use government staff that's already on board instead of paying a support contractor to do that. And then this was sort of general computer-assisted and advisory services that the Office of Information Security was using, and for one example being for documentation reviews, but there were other things, engineering tasks and so forth, and the OIS, the Office of Information Security, decided that they had a robust enough strength in-house to get along without the additional support, so canceled this contract support vehicle as well. Now I'm going to just carry you through some of the other highlights and we're not going to go review each bullet here, and I intend to stop on time. So again, feel free to ask me questions, or if you want to talk on the break, I can send you stuff after. But those two first lines up there are rather interesting. We have a bunch of data warehouses related to that line I told you about on the matrix, by the way. We have a bunch of data warehouses at each VISN. That's a health delivery network. It's an area of the country where analytics on healthcare delivery can be done by the director of that particular VISN. How many veterans were seen, how many veterans had pneumonia, did they get their Pneumovax, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it turns out at the regional level, of which we have 4 in the country, at the regional level, there is very, very close, almost complete duplication of the data in the data warehouses at the regional level as there is at the VISN level. So, which appears to us to be nonsense. I mean, quit doing stupid things. So, we are now putting the plan together to just shut down those VISN level data warehouses. We don't need them anymore. So now that'll save us a tech refresh bill, but what it's also going to allow is all those servers can be repurposed. So when you come up with the savings here is in quotes, right? First of all, we're not out here to return any money to the Treasury. That's not what we're doing. Right. And number 2, this particular savings isn't even going to show up in our comptroller's budget. It's going to be a bunch of servers that are going to go from one use to another use, which would presumably be a higher priority use for the major initiatives. Next one, same group of people, the corporate data warehouse, HDR, and Meadows, yes. Yes, I think, yes, it's about right, yes. From a warehouse perspective? The direct answer is we don't know, but we're finding out. So it appears that our operations division, we know there are thousands of what are called Class 3 software applications running that were developed locally in Vista, thousands of them. But it appears we actually, I showed you this inventory of inventories. There's one not on there, right? I just discovered last week that there is actually an inventory of Class 3 applications. And it happens to be run by VISN 1. It's run by our operations division, but it's only run by them for the convenience of all the VISNs. And they may be, they tell tell me there's somewhere around 30,000 or so of those Class 3 applications in that inventory. So we're going to have that inventory delivered to us now, so I'll now have the Class 3 inventory as well. And so that'll give us a better fix on your question. I think that's where most of the variation will be, is in the health side. I don't think we'll have the same problem with benefits and cemeteries. With that inventory, the other thing we want to do, I don't know that I have too much in here on it, but we're also making a move towards open source software, particularly for the electronic health record. So on the open source side, that Class 3 inventory and looking at that variation out there is going to help us understand what we're going to do with our first open source gold disk and what's going to be on it. And it has to be compatible with what set of constraints and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have a much better handle on that, I think, in a few weeks, actually, as a result of getting hold of that database. Yeah, Marie. I haven't. I can't. Jerry Davis is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Information Protection. I mean, I would have to ask him. He probably is, I would imagine, pretty far into metrics, but I'm speculating on that. I haven't seen the metrics he's using, no. I don't know those. CDW is the Corporate Data Warehouse, the Health Data Repository. Meadows is essentially an extraction, translation, and loading tool. Same thing, we're looking at consolidating all that together because we also have this huge proliferation of ETL tools all over the place. Burroughs, let's see, BDN is the one I mentioned earlier about the end-of-life product, so we're going to bring that up again. See if there's anything else. We're looking at our enterprise license agreement with Microsoft and how we can do better there. We do have a bunch of policies which Roger wants to put in place right now, and again, we're coming up with the estimates on what the savings here would be, or cost avoidance. But as you know now, probably a lot of people in your own organizations too, they have a tower or something in their office, and they periodically have, or have issued to them a laptop, etc. Well, we don't see that that should be the case anymore, so we're going to declare that everyone either gets a tower in their office or a laptop, but not both. So it's what we would kind of call it as one CPU per person policy. You choose what you want, a laptop with a docking station or a tower, but you don't get both. Desktop printers instead, and move to multifunction devices. We have desktop printers, again, thousands of them throughout the VA. When people could walk 5 feet and get something out of a printer right outside their door, with huge savings. And by the way, most of the savings on number 2 there will not come to us. Most of the savings is going to go to VHA or VBA because they actually buy the toner. So, but nonetheless, it's on our list of recommendations. And then have the business community take over the multifunction devices in their entirety. And reimbursement for private phone lines, dedicated fax lines we have throughout the organization, which we don't think there's a need for at all. No air cards, limit back barrier distribution on this corporate access gateway, number 9. As that becomes more and more robust over time, we would want to relook then at our government furnished equipment policy with contractors. And as that access gateway becomes more and more robust, broader bandwidth, handle more capacity, we don't have to do GFE any longer, right? We get out of the GFE business altogether. So that's the list of policies. Roger actually wants to begin to sign those out right away, and from a ROI perspective, we may or may not have an exact ROI on those, but some of those Roger wants to go ahead and move forward anyway. Simply, as I said, quit doing stupid things. I mean, if you don't need a desktop printer, then get rid of the damn thing. I mean, we don't want to obsess for months over computing an ROI on that. It would be much better just have Roger sign out the policy. So we're not going to have an ROI on everything because there's some things that we would consider sort of self-evident. Let's see here. Scrub inventory, big fix, I talked about that. Let's see, data center consolidation, we talked about that. Move to Windows 7. At the last bullet down there, we do still have some applications which are tied to a specific version of Microsoft Office. So as VBMS, that program moves forward, we would intend to decouple that. Let's see here. Telehealth. I mentioned capacity demand mismatches. Well, our customers want to put telehealth equipment all over the place, two simultaneous video sessions that can be handled anywhere and where some set of doctors and patients might want to talk to each other. Well, it turns out for the equipment that nationally, at least on a national basis, if you look at telemedicine across the country, there's only about 2 or 3% of visits that are done through telemedicine. So it looks to us like, we are diving into this from an infrastructure perspective long before the healthcare processes are ready for it. So here too, we're going to set up we are going to set up here a monitoring capability to look at the the load on our network, and we're going to go to a just-in-time delivery notion here rather than simply installing this gear everywhere that the customer says they want it. We're going to look at a just-in-time delivery mode, which says when your telemedicine capacity looks like it warrants it by these set of tools we have in place, you'll then get your gear or the next upgrade to it. So it's a much more of a grayscale for telehealth and simply install it everywhere. Let's see. Telephony. We have a cloud telephony strategy. I do think we should. That's a big enough thing that I think we do want to be very deliberative about it and create an ROI for that. ROIs are not easy to do in the VA. I don't know how they are in your institutions, but there's a lot of effort involved in that, cultural and analytic both, because people aren't given naturally to do these things. They don't like them for some reason or other. But anyway, development and test center costs, that last bullet down there, it does appear to us there's multiple development environments throughout the organization, so we're going to try to coalesce development environments and achieve some savings there. These MIs, major initiatives, and right now, pretty much a lot of these major initiatives need to develop something that stand up their own development environment, so we're going to try to get out of that. We do not have a lot of external development. Do not. I'd say for Chapter 33 with Spay Wars and probably VBMS now, I think, you could sort of consider that external. We're doing that through contractors, through Spay Wars, yes. But I'd say that's a very small percentage of our development. We are now trying to energize an open source community, so that will be another way of changing that. Right now, our initial focus of that open source work would be health, the electronic health record, not benefits, not cemeteries. That's just standing up. It's OCERA is the agent, the open source electronic health record agent, OCERA. They have a website. If any of you want to go sign on to it, you should look at it. You can join if you want, and any of you who have an inclination to develop software, please have at it. We'd love to welcome you into OCERA. Identity management, access control. Again, unfortunately there, it still looks like we're into a lot of roll your own. If you're an initiative and you need to get access to data, I mentioned the data office consolidation earlier. Here we're actually going to look at starting to scrub across all the major initiatives to actually take a look at what's a candidate for a common service. And the number one on the hit parade for a candidate for common service is identity management. I mean, everybody recognized it right away with, but pulling it off and getting everybody to do it is in common is the next big challenge, and we're still struggling with that. But anyway, we just did meet with Roger Baker about that, and I think we're going to move forward there. We do have ASD, my organization, has architects embedded on each of these major initiatives, so we've now begun to pull those architects together and look for other opportunities for development in common across all those major initiatives. Again, to get out of doing stuff multiple times and do it once and let many people use it, yes. Yes, in the what we call the Integrated Electronic Health Record, IEHR, that is the VA-DoD initiative. Identity management is a big piece of that. We're working very closely with Defense Manpower Data Center, Janine Groth, and Mary Dixon, and I'd say there's very close collaboration there. Now, again, I'm not about to tell you that we've gotten down to what the maximally efficient solution out of that collaboration would be. I don't think we're there yet. but we've been working with them very closely on IEHR probably for the better part of a year now, focused on this. So yes, there's lots of lockdowns in common, people getting together and laying their plans in place. But you know, I don't think, for example, the record locator service. I mean, we really should have a single record locator service, right? Well, right now, I think between the two of us, we have 5 record locator services, 3 in DOD and 2 in the VA. Well, we don't, you know, so there's a lot of stuff we can still straighten out there, I think. But the rudiments of collaboration are there, yes. We're working very closely together. And North Chicago, by the way, is a big accelerator in that regard, right? It's the Navy VA site in North Chicago where it's forced everybody to come to grips with the reality of how we're going to deal with identity in a single integrated facility that's both VA and DOD. So not that that architecture is the final solution either that we want, but it's at least put in a here and now way, a very immediate way, put the problem on everybody's radar. The Class 3 question we had earlier about variation across sites, another step we're trying to take is why would we, in general, do any Class 3 development, local development, in-house in VA any longer? That same person, whoever wants to dream up that new thing, could simply now, even as an individual, go sign up for a membership with Ocira and do that very same software work on the open source product. So there's really almost no need for that local variation any longer, and there's no superstructure on top of them to tell them not to do it. There's 2 forms of agreement with Ocira that anybody can strike. One is the organization, VA with Ocira, that's one agreement. The second agreement is any individual with Ocira. So any of you out there, any staff member of the VA can strike up their own individual agreement, which eliminates all superstructure, all priority, all bureaucratic nonsense inside the beltway with respect to getting your beloved software done. You can go develop it right on the open source product if you want to spend your nights and weekends doing it. You can't spend government time doing it, but you can do it nights and weekends. So there would really be no need, in essence, for ongoing Class 3 work as we once envisioned it, really. This is the consolidation of development environments, which I mentioned. To identify additional common services, we're going to stand up this common service work group like identity management, access control. The next big one, number 2 on the hit parade, is a semantic mediation and harmonization service for disparate data to harmonize semantics across all of our data stores. So that's number 2 on the hit parade. I don't know who's keeping time here. I saw somebody stick to work. 5 minutes. Okay, great. VELA Enterprise Service Bus I mentioned earlier already. Streamlining the acquisition process. There's a lot that has to be done there with respect to making sure we're not issuing contracts for duplicative buys, but that is a big challenge yet. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to get to that. Telework, again, setting a policy in place for telework's easy, right? Tell people they can go work at home. And with our 1 CPU policy, presumably the person would say, well, give me a laptop. I don't need that hunk iron in my office anymore, so that's really pretty easy, too. The more difficult thing is all the other space manipulation that has to happen to really take advantage of this, because if you don't shut down the person's office, which they no longer occupy, you haven't really saved much money. So the harder part is all the facility construction implications of telework to actually save something. If you don't do that, telework might just add cost to your operations, right, because of all the network connectivity and other stuff for somebody to work at home. If you're not reducing the expenditures back at the office in a commensurate manner, you're not really saving money yet. So that's the harder part of telework, which we're trying to work our way through right now. It plays into on-site and off-site rates for contractors too. There's a lot to that. But anyway, we're definitely pushing telework. We've realigned some of these organizations I don't think are too important to you. The data management thing I mentioned to you earlier about the Data Management Program Office. The release architecture we just established, this is the first time ever. We have gotten the product development community, the infrastructure engineers, OIS, well, and Comptroller, but Comptroller was a minor part of this, but the other 3 together to say what are exactly the criteria that software has to comply with for our release management authority, who's the head of operations, to say, yes, I'm going to put this thing into the production environment. We now have the first release of that release architecture. It just came out last week. where all have agreed. So now we have something to build on, and I'm sure it'll get more sophisticated over time. But that, for us, was a big step forward in trying to, you might say from an RTF perspective, what's the use of that? And the use of that is to try to eliminate rework, right? When something is not suitable for production, to send it back to the development center. We hope to avoid all that. So I mentioned to you, just sort of in summary, the NSOC and cybersecurity savings. We've done some, taken some savings already in all these areas in the way the FY12 budget was put together. From a product development perspective, one of the applications we're winding down, it looks like, I think it may be already paused, is the strategic asset management application. I think we're going to, I believe we're actually going to kill that, not just reduce it, but that's in the process of being wound down as a method. And just to show you quickly, that one line, I'm not going to go through all these, but that one line I showed you of data repositories where there were 91 applications that had something to do with data repositories, this is the kind of analysis that the program manager for that, Jack Bates, had to go through. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slides of stuff just to analyze that one line in that matrix to try to figure out which one of those 91 are actually needed and which ones are redundant and duplicative. So a lot of work there, but there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity. I also mentioned in the systems inventory, the graph where you had the blue line, the red line, that there was a whole set of attributes to describe each system. This is the attributes that are in there. So this is the information we collect on each system from the system owner and the business sponsor to make a determination ultimately later on whether this system should continue or not. This is the one where we want to look at add the interfaces to it that we talked about earlier. I think that's it for my slides. Is there more of that? Yeah, that's it. So. No, I think we would want to add that, right. And as I say, going forward, we have OIS represented in our program office, so I think we'll cover that, yes, that way. But yes, I think we would want to put it in there, yes.
All right, we have time for one final question.
We didn't do that. Great question. Fortunately, we have a reasonably strong business architecture community in VHA and in VBA, right? So we just took their business capability matrix from them. That's their business function framework. So if anything's missing, that would be their determination to make. Well, I'm not sure mobile would show up there. I mean, these are things like appoint a patient, process a claim. I mean, mobile would be a way of doing that. It would be another level down.
Understood. I just stated it, but I'm thinking about all the applications that individuals want to download or looking for.
Also a different problem, right? Yes, and sure, if we could get to an internal app store, that would be great. We're not at an internal app store yet. Nonetheless, policing up all this stuff that might be useful and might not be useful, to me, would be a really useful prerequisite to figuring out what would need to be in that app store. Right now, after we get the right infrastructure in place, depending on who's going to develop the stuff in the app store, by the way, if we have, let's say, TRM compliant and otherwise compliant stuff in that app store that comes from the open source community, and App 1 and App 2 do about the same thing, once we get to the point where we have sufficient data harmonization and identity management